Some of you don't. My name is Buscemi, Santi Buscemi, and I teach here, obviously. And this is my colleague, Dr. Bill DiRienzo. Dr. DiRienzo has a PhD in political science and did his doctoral dissertation on Shakespeare and politics. And he has also spoken here at Middlesex before on that very subject before our honor society. And we have here our trusty recorder. Introduce yourself, sir.
My name's Aaron.
Aaron Thurman. All right.
Class.
Okay. Okay. So a little bit about the play and about the author. The author's name is Luigi Capuana. Louis Capuana, C-A-P-A-U-N-A, and he is he's a 19th century Italian writer who began a movement in Italian circles called verismo, which means realism. Okay, and he's a Sicilian. He was born in Sicily, and with his fellow Sicilians Giovanni Verga and Federico di Roberto, he was. You don't have to remember these names, don't worry. He was part of this movement called verismo or realism. Actually, it's naturalism. What the veristi believed was that people did not have a lot of free will. Okay, they were influenced in their actions by their biology, their environment, heredity, politics, economics, and as a result, they were really pawns to the universe. They were used by the universe. These guys don't have a really optimistic view of life. Okay, it's pretty dark actually. However, they wrote some great literature about it. Capuana is the least known, between Verga and Capuana, he is the least known of the veristi in America. He's pretty well known in Italy and in the rest of Europe. His friend Giovanni Verga, now we're in trouble. His friend Giovanni Verga, I don't know if you have ever heard of him, but he wrote a number of things, novels and short stories. One of his short stories is called Cavalleria Rusticana, or Rustic Chivalry. And from this, an opera was written, a very famous opera, whose the music writer was Mascagni, and it won all sorts of awards. If you have seen The Godfather 3, the movie Godfather 3, which is a terrible movie, but it's important to bring up now because the Godfather's son, Michael's son, is starring in an opera in Sicily, and the opera is Cavalleria Rusticana by Giovanni Verga, Luigi Capuana's very colleague and very good friend. So at any rate, both are veristi naturalists, as I said, and you will see in the play the influence of naturalism. There are two characters, a judge from northern Italy who is going to speak in Italian, and we'll do a little Italian and Sicilian for you, and the criminal, Donzaro Brisca, which is me. Okay, I played him, and he is accused of murder. And in Italy, judges, magistrates, are the ones who interrogate, not district attorneys. Okay, so they interrogate, and you'll see that in the play what happens is he gets the truth out of me. I deny it at first that I killed this guy. And it's a crime of passion, okay? It is a crime of passion, and what is happening is, see here the biology comes in. The fact that I am controlled by my biology, I cannot overcome that. I can't stop my passion. And what happens in the play is that a young couple was married, and what is happening is that the man's wife is having an affair with somebody else. And Don Brisco, me, Donzaro, I should say, I am jealous of that. So I'm the third guy in line, okay? And so I kill the lover, right? Okay.
What shall we do? So, in the car? Tell them about the north and...
Oh yeah, that's right. The other thing, lots of things going on in this play, actually. It's a very complex play. It's short, it's only one scene. But another thing that's going on is that you'll see in a moment, as Bill walks in, we'll read the original Italian and Sicilian. The judge speaks Italian because he's from northern Italy. I'll speak Sicilian because I'm Sicilian, or Donzato is Sicilian. And he's a laborer, he's a barber, and the judge is, of course, higher class, and he's from Piemonte, which is the northern part of Italy. In Italy, even to this day, there is this divide between the north and the south. The northerners think they're far superior to the Sicilians and, of course, the Neapolitans and everybody else. And there is this socio-economic tension and political tension that happens, and it's evident in this play. So, without further ado, Donzato has to don his hat, and okay, and here comes the judge. Here comes the judge. Signor Luigi.
Sì. Tante grazie, signore.
Just to set it up, we have a court recorder, and we have the judge, and we have the accused. We'll start in the Italian and the Sicilian.
Ecco, veniamo al fatto. 2 notte fa stato l'ammazzo del piccolo Virgilio Pietro Morocco detto, un figlio del Gimimuruto.
Imeruto, signori. Noi diciamo a così.
Ah, va bene, che ne sapete voi?
Io? Signori, io non so niente.
Come niente? Il fatto è accanto a 50 passi del vostro salone.
Hai risvenuto a così, per modo di dire, quasi niente, signori. Io faccio volvere e grazie a Dio ho tanti abbonati che mi tengono occupati tutta la santa giornata. Radili, pettinari, tagliare capigli. Siamo 4 in tuo salone e non abbiamo largo manco di gettarmi la testa. Certi abbonati preferiscono la mia mano a chigio dei giovani, forse perché li diverto con i barziletti. E capisci, Vicenza, in sapone, radi tanto facci, taglia capigli di tanti testi, che può badare a fatti di altri. E la mattina, che lessi in tuo giornale, oh Dio, restai con la bocca aperta e dissi, a così doveva finire.
Perché dovete finire così?
Già ci aveva finito a così, capisci, Vicenza? Entro un momento mi vidi davanti gli occhi, più modo di dire, la brutta faccia del marito. Ogni volta che lo vidi passare e ripassare in prigione, senza che uno sapesse perché, io pensavo, chi faccia di galera? Questo però non vuole dire. Ci sono a sto mondo tanti disgraziati che brutti di lo peccato mortale e che intanto si pensano da bene. Che questo in verità io era certo di un ingannarmi.
Eravate amici, egli veniva spesso a sedersi davanti alla porta del vostro salone.
Spesso, qualche volta, permettiti compare, mi chiamava compare a tutti e io, servitevi compare. C'era già una sedia vacante, c'è chi aveva a dire, non permetto, il salone è il luogo pubblico, come un caffè, come una pizzeria, con la differenza che per assistere non si paga niente e non si obbruca di farsi radere, di farsi tagliare i capigli. Permettiti, compare. E si aspettava molto fumando, con gli occhi mezzi chiusi, che appariva addormesciuto. Stava mezz'ora, un'ora, chiù, e da principio, lo confesso, la cosa mi siccava. Correando certe voci.
Quali voci?
Okay, now we'll start with the English. I think you get the idea that his language is a little bit more refined than mine. Okay, mine is a dialect of Italian. His speaking Florentine or Tuscan. Okay, which is the official language of Italy today. All right, so shall we start with the English, Signor Luigi?
Who?
So let's get to the facts.
Okay.
No, we'll start from the beginning.
Oh, from the beginning?
Yeah.
Okay.
Da capo.
Da capo. So, let's get to the facts. 2 nights ago, in the Valley of the Lily, Pietro Morocco, called the son of Chimaruto, was killed.
Yimerutu, sir. That's how we say it. The hunchback.
Okay, what do you know of this?
I? Sir, I know nothing.
What do you mean nothing? The murderer cut only 50 paces from your shop.
I've answered this way, in a manner of speaking. Almost nothing, sir. I'm a barber, and thank God I have many customers who keep me busy the whole blessed day, shaving and combing, cutting their hair. There's 4 of us in the shop, and we don't even have room to scratch our heads. Certain customers prefer my work over that of the younger men, perhaps because I entertain them with jokes. And you understand, sir, that soaping up, that shaving of so many faces, cutting the hair of so many heads, who can bother with the affairs of others? In the morning, I read about it in the paper. Oh my God, my mouth dropped wide open. And I said, it had to end that way.
Why did it have to end that way?
Because it had to. Please understand, Your Excellency. In that moment, I saw before my very eyes, as they say, the evil face of the husband. Each time I saw him pass up and down, I got the impression, without knowing why, I thought, that face belongs in jail. But that doesn't mean anything. There are in this world so many wretched people, uglier than mortal sin, and they are good people nevertheless. With this one truly, I was sure I wasn't deceived.
You were friends. He often came to sit by the door in front of your shop.
Often, a few times. Would you mind if I sat here, Kumbari? He called me Kumbari. He called everybody Kumbari. And I, sure, take a load off, Kumbari. There was an empty chair there. What should I have said? No, I won't allow it. The shop was a public place, like a cafe, like a bar, with the exception that it cost nothing to sit down, and there's no obligation to get a shave or a haircut. May I, Kumbari, he said, and he sat there, as quiet as a mouse, smoking with his eyes half shut. He seemed to be sleeping. He'd stay a half hour, an hour, maybe more, and from the beginning, I admit, it annoyed me. People talk.
Who?
Certain people. Your Honor knows better than I that people gossip. I make it a habit of not believing a word that they say about a person, neither good nor evil. That way, I never make a mistake, and I don't get upset.
Who was talking? Don't change the subject.
Who was it? Who was it? Today you hear from one person, tomorrow from another, over and over. One is convinced that the wife, you understand, Your Excellency, a beautiful wife is a punishment from God, and one does not see certain things. In short, because he doesn't want to see.
He, meaning the husband?
I don't know anything, Your Honor. To tell you the truth, each time he came to sit by the front door of the shop, I said to myself, if this guy doesn't see what's going on, he's completely blind. If he doesn't want to see, he's really, you understand, Your Excellency, there's no escaping this, help me find a word.
Dilemma?
Dilemma, yes indeed. And DiBiase, the notary, who comes to my shop for a shave, used another word that hits the nail on the head, as they say.
So, according to you, Don Nicasio
Oh, sir, I'm not embellishing. He saw in his own heart. Everyone has his own conscience, and Jesus Christ has left us this: judge not, if you would not be judged. In fact, one morning or one evening, I don't recall, oh yes, now I remember. One morning, I was in the doorway sharpening a razor. I got the urge to call him out. He passed by looking very glum. "Hello, compadre," I said, and he made a gesture with his head and his eyes, as if to ask a question. "What's wrong?" I asked. He came closer, stared right at me, and answered, "Didn't I tell you that someday I'd do something crazy? And I'll do it, compadre. They're pulling me by the hairs." "So let's cut them," I said jokingly, in order to pull him out of his fixation.
So what did he tell you? What was he referring to?
He was speaking about his wife, I guess. Perhaps somebody put a bug in his ear. It only takes half a word to deprive a person of peace. And then, like a gentleman, he let slip from his mouth, "I'll do something crazy." That's it. I don't know anything else, Your Honor.
And you responded only with a joke?
How should I have responded? Do it? In fact, he left shaking his head. No one can enter the mind of another. And once, when hearing him let it all out,
So he opened up to you?
to me, sir, and to others. You understand, Your Honor. One hears it and bears it and bears it, and in the end, in order not to burst, he vents himself to whoever crosses his path.
But you weren't the first person he ran into. You used to go to his house.
As a barber, Your Honor, every time he called for me.
As a barber. And probably even when you knew that he was no longer at home.
For a certain purpose. For a certain purpose? No, never.
And finding his wife alone, you allowed yourself...
Slander! Slander, Your Honor! Who says so? Your Excellency! Perhaps a few times. I let out a few words slip out of my mouth, but I was only joking. You understand, Your Excellency. Finding myself face to face with a beautiful woman who you know can take a joke, even if only not to look stupid.
You weren't just joking. You threatened her.
Slander! Threaten her, and why? Is there a need to threaten a woman like that to receive some favors? To this day, I've never lowered myself. I'm not a little boy, sir. Here we say piccinidru. I don't know if in your part of Italy.
I understand. A boy, a child, however passion makes us do foolish things.
That woman could slander Jesus Christ himself. Passion? At my age? I'm over 40 years old, Your Honor, and I've made a few white hairs. I've done some foolish things in my younger days, like all the others. But now, and for a woman like that, I'm not blind, even if her husband, Don Nicasio, is. I knew that lout, that Pietro, that son of a hunchback, poor wretch, he paid dearly for it. I knew that lout had made her fall madly in love. It happens like this to certain women. They rush around. They take this lover. They leave that lover. And they fall into the claws of a shameless man who will chew their eyes out. But that's not all. He beat her, Your Honor, and not once or twice. And I, through my compassion for that poor husband, whom I pity. That's why she goes around saying I threatened her. She says this because I was stupid enough to go ahead and lecture her the day Don Nicasio confided in me that he would do something crazy. She misunderstood, or pretended to misunderstand, that evil bitch.
No, you said that...
Yes, sir. Now I remember what I said. I'll take that pleasure away from you, even if I have to go to jail. But sir, I was speaking on behalf of her husband, impulsively. You understand, Excellency? One performs the part as if it were really his.
The husband knew nothing of this.
Should I have boasted to him? I've done this, and I've done that. One helps a friend, or one doesn't. I feel this way about it.
Why were you so interested?
It's my nature, Your Honor. I'm made this way. I have a soft heart.
Your threats became persistent, and with threats, also promises. And what promises? A gold necklace with a watch, a pair of earrings.
It's true. It's true. I don't want to deny it. I found them in my pocket by chance. They belong to that sainted soul of my wife. I'm not embarrassed to say this to you. I was going to pawn them. And in order to stop that poor man from committing some madness, I said something stupid. Having accomplished that person, getting the young man out of the way, I said to Don Nicasio, "Friend, give me back those little golden baubles." He's a gentleman. He wouldn't even let me finish speaking.
But when she responded to you, "Keep them, I don't need them," why did you start to entreat her to cry?
Oh, Your Honor, if you must know, I didn't know how to control myself. At that point, sir, I felt as if I were the husband. I would have strangled her with my own hands. I would have committed that madness that Don Nicasio wanted to.
You've been cautious. One sees that. You thought, if not me, then no one else. Meaning, of course, the lover. And you put yourself in place of the husband, who up until now let things go either because he didn't believe or because he thought it more expedient to tolerate a small evil.
Perhaps I allowed a word to slip out to him.
Don Nicasio says,
Even he? He's against me too? He turns against me? He attacks me like that?
"Stay calm and sit back down." You began by protesting that you knew nothing, but you knew many things. You probably know a few others as well. Stay calm.
They want to push me off a cliff, Your Honor. I'm starting to understand.
When passion blinds one, he falls off a cliff with his own 2 feet.
But then, Your Excellency imagines...
I don't imagine anything. It's clear that the instigator has been you, and the only instigator.
Slander. Slander, Your Honor.
That evening, you were seen plotting with the husband until late.
I attempted to dissuade him. I told him, let it go. Since your bad luck wanted it this way, it would have been him or someone else. It's the same. And Don Nicasio repeated like a madman, another yes, but that despicable lout, no. His exact words.
You were at the corner of the Alley of the Lily, waiting in ambush.
Who saw me? Who saw me? I was there to do good. See how I wind up for wanting to do good? Yes, Your Excellency, at the corner. I had accompanied him to that point, and I saw that there was no way to dissuade him. It was 11:30. I was about to go, angry, without even saying goodbye. I was there to do good.
So?
So, Your Honor...
I should pull the words from your mouth with pliers.
Your Excellency knows how it is. At night, when there's lightning, one sees, and then one sees nothing at all. That's how it was. I turned around. Don Nicasio had rushed through the little door of his house at the turn of the corner.
You ran after him?
Lord, the same idea. You understand, Your Excellency.
Who closed the door? It was closed right away.
In all that confusion, sir, 2 men who were battering each other against the wall, breathing for dear life. I wanted to scream. Crash! One falls down hard, and in the meantime, I felt somebody grab my arm. Get out of here, compadre. You're not involved in this, he said. Just like that. Like that. I don't know how I got involved in all of this. In fact, I believe that Don Nicasio would have murdered his wife as well. That bitch had escaped upstairs and had locked herself in the house with the crossbar at the door. I read it in the newspaper. So I've told you everything that Your Excellency wanted. You've hooked me like a fish in fresh water.
Nevertheless, the doctor's report shows that the blow that cut the carotid artery of the deceased had been from a razor.
Where does your excellency want to take me? Oh, what treachery Don Nicasio has done me. 2 days before, your honor. One cannot care for everything. One cannot predict everything. 2 days before, he came to the shop and said, "Compadre, lend me a razor. I have a corn that's killing me." He seemed so calm that I didn't suspect anything. I even warned him, "Watch out, don't fool around with corns." I know, compadre. What does Don Nicasio say? Does he deny it?
Don Nicasio and his wife has confirmed it. Says that he climbed the stairs and he knocked at the door. His wife opened it and asked him why he had come home so late.
And nothing else?
He says he had supper, went to bed, and in the morning...
Your honor, bring him here to face me. And she, that bitch, what does she say?
She says you threatened her. I'll take this fun away from you, even at the cost of going to jail.
So horns don't grow on that cuckold of a husband even now. This is all the intrigue of that bitch.
Stop denying it. At this point, it is clear.
I've always said it. That slanderer has put a spell on me. A spell, your honor. It can't be otherwise. The more she said no, the more I lost my head. And the more I felt my blood burning. And those no-nos, I would have burned myself alive. But at this point, I don't want someone else to suffer for me. Yes, I murdered Pietro Marocco, your honor. The fault is that bitch's, your honor. And she, who is the cause of this evil, justice leaves in peace. You'd send me to prison, your excellency. For how long? 10? 15 years? It doesn't matter. I'll deliver true justice. I swear it by this blessed cross. I, with my own hands, your honor. In jail, I won't think of anything else. And if when I'm out, I find her alive, old, reduced to a thing uglier than the devil, it won't matter. I'll have to burn that evil witch. No. And I'll say yes. And I'll drink her blood to the last drop. And I'll go to my death in jail. At this point, the boat is broken and the sea awaits it.
The clerk will read you your sentence.
Thank you. That business about blood at the end, very interesting because it really is part of the Veristi's philosophy of our inability to overcome our passions and our influences, the influences that come upon us from society. He is completely overtaken with this woman. And when she will not give him her favors, and when she gives her favors to somebody else, who is not her husband, it even gets worse, you see. He even goes even crazier. And so that's what happens. The last line too is very interesting. The boat is broken and the sea awaits. This takes place in an area that is near the sea, actually. The sea imagery comes into a lot of Capuana's works. The boat is broken, I'm dead, and the universe is going to take me now. I have no control any longer. I'm going to sink. So, I hope you liked what we did. I should tell you that I spent 2 weeks in the author's hometown about 2.5 years ago when the college graciously granted me a sabbatical. And I lived in his house, I studied in his house, which is now a museum and a library, which was quite a wonderful thing, and toured the area of Sicily with him. I have 2 books by him that are translated. One is a book of fairy tales, and that's a bilingual edition, which you can buy at the bookstore. And I also have a novel that I translated, his masterpiece novel, and I want to tell you a little bit about that as well. Okay, let me get some water, I'm a little bit dry. The novel is called...
It's the passion, the blood.
The blood, that's right, the blood that came up, right? Sicilian's passionate?
I don't know. And from Piedmont, we're not too.
No, they're not too passionate. You saw how he was very reserved and, you know,
The script is written that way.
Good judge.
Very controlled and
he's very controlled and,
he's always looking down
yes,
at the peasant.
at the peasant, this barber, you know, and this, especially this Southerner, this Sicilian.
Yeah, right.
Why did we elect the Sicilians into Italy to begin with? You know, that's what he's thinking. Of course, they forgot that if it wasn't for the Sicilians, we wouldn't have them. This is Garibaldi came
Yeah,
to
he's right.
Sicily first.
He's absolutely right.
And my great uncle fought with Garibaldi. That's true. He had died in the war, and my great grandfather then, and his name was Santi too. Yeah, but then my grandfather remarried. I'm sorry, my great grandfather remarried, and after his wife died, and after his son died, and they had another son, and they named him Santi again. And I'm named after my grandfather. Anyway, Capuana, go back to him. Capuana is, let me tell you a little bit about how I came upon him. This might be interesting for you.
This is a great story.
I was in Sicily in 1976, visiting my aunt in my father's hometown, which is called Menfi, M-E-N-F-I, named after the Egyptian Memphis. Okay, because the Arabs were in Sicily for 2 centuries, and they gave Sicily, they left a lot of place names. One of them is Menfi. There are others as well. So I was there, and I was visiting my aunt. She lived in a little apartment on a street called Via Capuana. And I asked her, I said, Aunt, who is this Capuana guy? I thought maybe a general, you know, or a politician or something. And she said, no, scrittore. He was a writer. I didn't think of it. About 20 years later, I decided that I would do an anthology of Sicilian writing. I write textbooks as well, anthologies, essays, you know, collections of essays, as my students can tell you because they've bought one and use it in class. At any rate, I wanted to do an anthology, a collection of Sicilian writing. And I came upon the name Capuana. I said, oh my God, there he is. And I found nothing translated by him. I wasn't going to do any translations. And I found nothing translated by him. So I said, well, I got to get him in there. So let me translate something. And I found some fairy tales. And I translated 1 or 2. I tried my hand at it. I've had no formal training in Italian, by the way. I never studied Italian formally. So I started to try, but I spoke it at home. I spoke Sicilian at home when I was a kid. So I started to translate, and I got better and better at it, and I got a couple of them published, actually, in journals. And then finally, I did all 20 fairy tales in this one book, called Once Upon a Time, that he wrote. He wrote a lot of different things, Capuana. And I got it published by Dante University of America Press. And he's been my publisher ever since for this, and I did, the second book I did was The Marquis of Roccaverdina, which is his masterpiece. Published in 1903. It is a very, very interesting novel. And if you want, we can sell you a copy at cost today. It's not a bilingual edition, but it is in English. And it's a murder mystery. But it's a murder mystery that with a twist. The Marquis of Roccaverdina is a nobleman. He lives in a town in Sicily, a fictional town, which is really Capuana's hometown. Okay, because I've been there, and it's Capuana's hometown. Let me tell you, he's got references to all sorts of things that I saw in the town of Mineo, where I was. At any rate, he's the only son of a very wealthy family. He's a marquis, which is like a duke, okay, or an earl or a baron, you know, one of those guys. And there are no marquises in England, I don't think. There are marquises in France, and they're France, Spain, and Italy. So he's the only son, as I say, of this very rich family, the only child. And when he's about 19 years old, they bring in this beautiful peasant woman who's about 16, and she's an earth mother, you know. And her name is Agrippina, okay, who happens to be, by the way, the patron saint of this town, all right, of Capuana's town. So Agrippina Somo comes in, and she's, you know, just She was an earth mother, very, very sexy, beautiful woman, but a peasant woman. Well, he's 19 years old, they bring this woman in, what do you expect? They have an affair, and the affair lasts for 10 years. Okay? At which time during that time his parents pass away, and his only surviving relative is an aunt, La Baronessa, and she's a very stuck-up, noble woman, you know, she has high aspirations for her family, and God forbid that her nephew should marry a peasant. Can't do that. So she says, it's time for you to marry, because you're 30 years old now, and the family name has to continue, but you can't marry that, and she calls her a couple of names, that evil woman, let's say, she calls her a whore. And so she says, you have to marry somebody, and she sets him up with somebody. So he can't decide. Again, the passion comes in. And you see here society's influence coming down, controlling him. He's got to marry somebody of his own class. He can't marry who he loves, and he really loves this woman. So what he does is he decides that he will marry Agrippina to the foreman of his farms. He owns several estates. And they will live together as brother and sister, not as husband and wife. And he will have also then have access to her after he's married. So he wants his cake and he eat it too. Well, he sends her away and she goes to his foreman's house. And he starts to get jealous. And here again, the irrationality, the emotions take over. He has no control over himself. And he starts to imagine that they're having an affair, that they broke their promise, that they did this and that. And one evening, as his foreman is coming home from one of the farms back to the city, he waits for him in the bushes, and with his fucile, he plugs him and kills him. Gets away with it. In fact, they accuse somebody else, and he's at the trial of this other man, and the other man gets convicted, this poor man, who made his living as being a hunter. Right? This poor guy with children gets put into jail, and the wife is crying and screaming. There's this wonderful scene, and it takes, and then they go back to the town, and they meet. He meets and he addresses the Marquis addresses these people who have seen the trial and have witnessed it, and now they want to know from him what he thinks. And of course he says, well, he deserved it, and this and that, he's lying through his teeth. Anyway, that takes place in an actual building that I was in. I actually did some research in that building. He then, as time goes on, he gets more and more morbid about this. He starts to feel guilt. He tried, and at one night, this is wonderful, wonderful scene. It's a very stormy night. The wind is knocking tiles off roofs, it's knocking flower pots over. And Capuana describes it as a war between the east wind and the west wind coming in and knocking people over. And this is very, very late at night. It's like 11 o'clock at night in this little town. And he's walking through these tiny streets. And Mineo it's a typical old town with these tiny little streets, you know, where only one car can pass through. And he walks in and he knocks on the door of the local priest. And the priest comes down and says, Marchese, what are you doing here? He said, I've come to confess. He says, at this hour, 11 o'clock at night? Yeah, I don't want everybody to see me. Come with you. Okay. And he goes upstairs and he sits down, and there's this wonderful scene where his shadow is spread across the ceiling of this room, this whitewashed room. And it looms over him. It's his own guilt looming over him, you know? And he takes off his coat and his fur hat, and he says, I killed Rocco Crescioni, he confesses. And the priest goes, oh my God, I couldn't believe it's you. And this little tiny priest, this sweet priest, kind of like Father Alex, our parish priest. And he says, I want absolution for my guilt, I can't stand it anymore. And the priest says, okay, but there's a man in jail. There's a man sitting in jail. And he's going to spend life in prison. And his children, you gotta go and get him out of jail, you gotta confess to the authorities. And he said, I'm not doing that, are you crazy? I can't do that, I'm the Marquess of Broca-Bernini, I can't do that. He says, you have to, I can't give you absolution otherwise. And he gets mad and he says, if you don't give me absolution, I'll get it from the Pope, don't you worry about it. I'll buy the Pope a new church, because he's a very wealthy man. And he thinks that he can do this. Well, this continues on and on and on. His guilt, and his guilt is bills and bills, and there are scenes that are there are just some beautiful, marvelous scenes. There's two I'll tell you about real fast. At one point, he has to go into his attic of his home to get something, and on the wall of the attic there's this huge crucifix, gigantic, as big as this, and it's in rags. The cloths have been eaten away by mice and by time, and they're falling off. And he sees the body of Christ, and if you've ever seen an Italian crucifix, I mean a real Italian crucifix, I mean they're very, very gory. There's blood coming out. There's the thorns are this big. And he remembers seeing that as a child, and he was very scared of it. And now he looks at it, and again he gets frightened as hell, and he runs out, and he can't stay there. And in fact, later on, he has the crucifix removed and sent to a monastery. So that's one scene that's wonderful. Then the other scene is one other scene where the poverty in Sicily. Capuana also talked about the poverty in Sicily, as did Verga at the time. Sicily was the poorest part of all of Italy. It was probably the poorest part among the poorest parts of Europe. My mother grew up in Sicily. And my mother told me once, in Sicily, she said, when I was growing up, eggs were given only to sick people. That's how poor they were. And if they ate meat, maybe once every 2 weeks, maybe. But usually their dinner was bread, a little pasta, maybe some fava beans, but that was about it. At any rate, there's a scene where people are just starving because there's a drought, 3-year drought. And at one point, the drought breaks. And Capuana talks about people coming up on the esplanade of this castle, which is still there, by the way, which is still in Mineo. It's a 5th century fortification, 5th century, that's BC, by the way. So, 2,600 years ago. And it's still there. And the people are walking along this esplanade, and they can see the valley. There's this huge valley. Mineo is way on the top of the hill. And they see this huge valley. And he talks about the clouds coming in and how they war against each other. They get blacker and thicker and more billowy, and they're faster, one after the other, and finally they break out into this rain, and it rains gloriously for hours. I mean, just a torrent of rain. And then he describes the water on the ground. It's just one of the most. We have time. Let me read it. Can I do that quick? Let me just read it. I think it's chapter 19. Yes. Okay, here it is. It says the drought breaking. And one morning, behind the hills of Barese, the clouds appeared slowly, as if they did not have the courage to show themselves after having absented themselves for 18 months, or as if they no longer recognized the road to Rabato. That's the town. They appeared in a long line, gathering one behind the other, rolling over one another. Then they stopped. From the windows, from the balconies that faced Barese, men, women, children stretched out their hands, invoking them, calling them as if they were living beings able to hear and understand. And from humble cottages near the embankment, from alleyways, from the streets, the people emerged, flocking to places where they could be certain, the voices being heard swirling about and crying, the clouds were not the malevolent joke of some evil fool. The esplanade of the castle resembled an anthill overrun by people of every class running to observe them, as if they were some new and unknown spectacle. Would the clouds remain motionless there? Would they disperse? Why were they still waiting to come ahead and explode in rain? Dense, dark, whitish at the edges, they spread out, wrapped themselves around each other, merged, forming a misty darkness over the line of the hills of Barese. They won't move. They're afraid of looking they're afraid of us looking at them, said an old peasant, and then he laughed. But no one laughed with him. Everyone was intent upon following with anxious eyes the unstable forms that very slowly continued to change, growing large here, thinning out there, and lips murmured prayers, vows, exhortations to these conscious beings not to take flight, and instead to spread their life-giving treasure of rain on the dying land below, which had for several long months invoked the comfort of a droplet of water through its thousands of cracks, which resembled dry human mouths. Then one of the lighter clouds broke away and started off like an advance guard, immediately followed by another, and then by a third. And the eyes that were watching every moment, every movement, began to blink infrequently with emotion. And those hearts, trembling in doubtful anticipation, started to beat faster with joy, overseeing the clouds advance no longer one after the other, but together, silently, to invade and darken the blue sky, descending toward the earth as if weighed down by the load they had carried in their wombs. And behind the hills of Baresi, darker and more somber clouds appeared, which rose, spurred on by the west wind, that all of a sudden began to blow, impregnated with moisture. And just as these were hovering in the air, coming from the curved line of hills, others appeared, overflowing the space, following closely behind those that came before, which rushed toward Rabato, covering the countryside with their shadows. Slowly they penetrated the valley, still bathed in sunshine, as if to devour its golden splendor. They were greeted by arms outstretched, blessing those that had already arrived over Rabato and that were moving ahead quickly. And at the first drops of rains, which were forced and sporadic, people shouted, "Glory, glory to God." They were greeted not only by the hundreds of people mad with joy and screaming from the esplanade of the castle, but also by all the bells of the churches ringing at full peal. And inside Rabato, from balconies, from windows, from streets, from the squares, people poured out to inebriate themselves in the spectacle of the blessed heavy rain, which still seemed incredible. Yes. And he is my wife knows and Bill knows that my passion right now is to make him well known in this country, because he's a great writer. I consider this one of the finest novels that I've read, and I'm not saying this because I translated it, but I really believe that, and I think that he deserves a lot more recognition in the English-speaking world than he's gotten. He's gotten virtually none. So I'm trying my best. Are there any questions for Bill or for me that you might have? Okay. Yes, Jim?
How long did it take you to translate a novel?
Somebody over here said, it took me about, this novel took me almost 2 years. It took me almost 2 years, and that means draft after draft after draft. And even when it was published, we had some problems with the file that was sent to the publisher. And this publisher publishes directly from the file that you email. So that we had to scrap the whole first printing, excuse me. And then we made changes of it. And then the second printing didn't have page numbers. So we had to scrap that and put page numbers. And this is the final print. But it took a long time. It's taking me less time now to translate because I'm learning more and more.
Well, that was my next question. Did you master the language more?
I have mastered more and more. I'm not a master at it yet,
Yeah,
but I've
but
mastered. I can't translate. I don't translate without a dictionary. I must have a dictionary, but most translators don't do that anyway.
And then the third question is there another novel coming?
Yes, there is. The next novel, well, the next thing that I will publish, I hope, will be a compilation of his short stories, of two of his volumes of short stories. The first is called Profili di Donne, which means profiles of women. And the second one is I Paesani, which means the neighbors. The first one is about 6 women and the men that they fall in love with and that fall in love with them. In each case, it's a different woman, and it's supposed to be, in each case, a different man, but it's not. It's really the same guy, which Capuana just gives them different names. And the guy is Capuana, there's no question about it in my mind. Capuana, by the way, was a real womanizer. I told you about the fact that he wrote the Marchese, and the Marchese had this mistress for 10 years. Well, Capuana had a mistress for a long time as well. Capuana was from an upper middle class family. He was not noble, but he was from a wealthy family. And he had a mistress, and he had several illegitimate children. And this did not speak well for him, but he married her off to a different man. And the children were put in an orphanage, which is not, I think something that and the guilt he felt for that, I think, comes out in this book. I believe that that's what this book is really about.
But Jim, to your question, my friend and colleague is being too modest. Sicilian is very, very difficult. All right, I read Italian, and when Santi shows me some of the Sicilian's writings in the local dialect written, I struggle to come up with an understanding of the sentences, and I can read Italian. So he has mastered something without any formal training or education, and it's pretty amazing, even given the fact that it was spoken at home. My family spoke some Neapolitan at home, but to hear it and then to see it in writing are two different things.
Very different.
Very different things. And Italians tend to speak very, very quickly. All right, if you ever watch a news program, listen to a Spanish news program, and then listen to an Italian news program. And you will see you can, with rudimentary Spanish, kind of follow much more readily
Absolutely.
the news in Spanish than you can with more than rudimentary knowledge in Italian. It's just the spirit of the language, or the pace of the culture, or the history of exclamation. I don't know exactly what it is, frankly. But he's being too modest. It is really quite an accomplishment.
Capuana wrote in both Italian and Sicilian. One of his objectives was to keep the folklore and the language of Sicily together. And in fact, but he also was an educated man, so he learned Italian in school. At home he spoke Sicilian probably. Actually, Sicilian is the first literary language of Italy, however. The first literature in an Italian vernacular was in Sicilian. What does that mean? It means that before that time, and this is about before the 12th century, in all of Europe, this is true, except maybe in England, okay? People did not write in their native languages. They wrote in Latin or Greek. Or in Italy, also in Sicily, they wrote in Arabic because the Arabs were there. There's a whole bunch of Arabic literature, by the way, that was written in Sicily. It's beautiful stuff. It's poetry. But at any rate, the first poetry in an Italian language is written in Sicily in a dialect. My father once told me that, and I didn't believe him. So anyway, I didn't believe him. But Capuana wrote both in Sicilian and Italian. He was the only Veristi who did that. In fact, the opera that I told you about, Cavaliere Stigana, that was in the Godfather movie, that opera, Verga wrote the short story for it. And then he wrote the libretto for it, the words for that opera, but in Italian. Capuana translates it into Sicilian, because Verga never wrote in Sicilian, although he was a Sicilian. At any rate, so there's both those languages in it. What am I doing next? You were saying I'm doing these short stories. The first one and one of them is going to be published in Middlesex, our translation in the Middlesex journal that we have. It's free to everybody. Another one has been translated, and it's called the Times of Sicily. It's on the web. You can find it on the web if you want to read it. Just put my name in, Times of Sicily, in this. You'll find two stories there, and I'll tell you about the second one in a minute. And then the second group of stories I'm translating is I Paesani. The first one about the women is very, very psychological. The second one is more folkloric, in the sense that it talks about the common people that he met, in his hometown, while the one about women is more about the psychology of love. Capuana, among the veristi, Capuana is the psychologist, while Verga is the sociologist. You know. But Capuana has tremendous insight into psychology. And he read Freud, and he read a number of people. That, no, he didn't read Freud. He couldn't have read Freud. No, he did not read Freud. He preceded Freud. Anyway, so that's what I'm working on next. Yes.
What were the predominant year range of when he's writing?
Okay, he was born in
1890s.
1835 is his birthday. He dies in 1915. His productive years are, he starts writing right after the invasion of Sicily by Garibaldi in 1860. And his really productive years are the 1880s and 90s. 70s, 80s, and 90s.
It sounds like he kind of relates a lot in ideology to like Hardy and
Yes, exactly.
And
exactly.
Was he aware of a larger realistic or
Yes, he was. He was. He had read Flaubert in the original and Zola, and he met Zola. And in fact, his first novel, which is called Giacinta, which means hyacinth, is dedicated to Zola, and it's his first very thick novel. And it's about a woman who, her name is Hyacinth, and she's raped as a young girl. And that rape carries the guilt of, she feels guilt over that rape. And that carries through her life. And she finally commits suicide. She has an affair with a man who's not her husband. She commits suicide, and her daughter dies in the middle of the novel as well. All really happy enough stuff.
Yeah,
and there's a rape.
Is this around the same time as Tess? And
yes.
Yeah.
Giacinta is about 1870, I would say. So about that. Yes, that's a good comparison. But yes, Hardy. As I was reading him, I said, "This is Hardy. This is Hardy." Yeah, Thomas Hardy. And but the Church. That was his first novel, and the critics loved it. The Church hated it. Because there's incest, there's not incest, there's infidelity, there's rape, and there's suicide. And so they condemned it outright. I'll tell you one more story and then let you go. Another piece that you'll find on the timesofsicily.com is a piece called Meeting Antonin Scalia. And many of you have already heard this story, but I'll tell the students. Antonin Scalia, of course, is the Justice of the Supreme Court. He's the longest sitting justice at this point. He is Sicilian, and so I sent him a copy of my book, the fairy tale book, when it first came out, and then I sent him a copy of the novel. He wrote back, and I got the letter. It was not this Christmas, but the Christmas before. I got the letter toward the end of December. He wrote back and he said, I thought he'd say, thank you very much and goodbye. But he wrote back and he said, thank you very much. I know the author very well because my father did his doctoral dissertation on Luigi Capuana. So, and get this, and if you'd like a copy of the dissertation, I'd be glad to lend it to you. Well, when I read that, Tracy knows and Michael knows that I rushed into the office. I was, and I broke a hole through the ceiling, right? And so, of course, I wrote back immediately a long letter. And one day I was in the office, and I got a call from his secretary, and she said, we want to make sure we have your correct address because it's his only copy. So, gave her my correct address, made sure, and they sent it. We waited 4 or 5 days, and I was very worried because it didn't come, finally it came. I don't know what happened with Federal Express, but anyway. So I got it, it was in a bubble wrap, and every night I would read a little bit, didn't put a mark on it, and took notes, I had copious notes in it, put it back into the bubble wrap, sent it back, and I emailed the secretary, and I said to her, I said, I hate to send this back to the mail because it might get lost. Would he mind if I came and gave it back to him personally? 10 minutes later, she emails me back and she says, absolutely. When do you want to come? He'd love to see you. That last March, just maybe about a year ago this March, we went down, Elaine and I went down, and he entertained us in his chambers for 25 minutes, speaking to us. And as we left, he's got 9 children, and I don't know how many grandchildren at this point, 30? Something. He's had 9 children, and he's very Catholic. So we started talking about our children, and I said, I only have 1 daughter, but I have 2 grandchildren. And I said, I was the older one. I said, he would have loved to have met you. And he said, well, why didn't you bring him? I said, well, I didn't feel, he said, don't be silly. He said, come back again. You're always welcome. We'll have you see a court trial, and I'll meet your grandson. So in December of this year, we went back. We made arrangements. My wife and I, Lane, and Matthew, my grandson, went down, and we saw a court case, a Supreme Court case. We were sitting, each justice has like 3 seats reserved for each of them. We sat in his seats. My seat said Mrs. Scalia on the back of it. So, right? This was reserved for her. So we sat in his seats. And there they were, Judge Roberts, Judge Thomas, Judge Sotomayor, Judge Kagan, Kennedy, they were all there, and Scalia, of course, Judge Roberts. And we saw 2 cases which we completely did not understand what they were talking about, but we tried, because the legalese is too much. And they keep making reference to old cases, by the way. And I will tell you this real fast. They are real people, all of them. And some I like and some I don't agree with, but you have to respect them all. At one point, one of the justices, I forgot who it was. It wasn't Kennedy, it was somebody else. It was one of the male justices, and I can't remember his name right now. But anyway, he cited a case, and the cases are cited by, it was the tribe, it was an Indian tribe, the Kiowa tribe. Have you heard of the Kiowa tribe? They were suing somebody else. And this was an old case, but they go back to these cases, to determine, what the precedent was. So he said, well, in Kiowa versus so-and-so. Well, Judge Alito, who's from New Jersey, by the way, right here in Hamilton. Judge Alito, he's only been on for 5 or 6 years. Bush appointed him. He says, that's Kiowa. Across the room. And he said, yeah, whatever, Sam. And then he went on. And and here we are in this very, very formal, you have to be quiet, just sit there quiet. And yeah, Sam, sure. And that kind of stuff. So, and then after that, after we heard the 2 cases, Scalia hosted us in his chambers for lunch. We spent an hour having lunch with him. And one of the, if you Google my name and put in meeting Antonin Scalia, you'll see an article that I wrote about him for the Times of Sicily. Another article will be coming out in Primo magazine this fall that I just finished on him and his judicial philosophy and his private life. So I did that. And I've been asked now, I should tell you this, to do another article on Judge Alito. So I'll be doing that. Any other questions about it? If you'd like a copy of the book, they're $10. That's my cost.
Question.
Yes.
Is Sicilian still a language
Yes.
spoken in popular?
Yes, it certainly is. It certainly is. When I was in Mineo, a lot of people spoke Sicilian. The young people tend to speak Italian, but the older people, especially who have stayed local, they still speak Sicilian. Yeah. Oh yeah. I was speaking to them Sicilian all the time. Yeah. So it's an interesting language. Some people consider it not a dialect, but a language itself. Sort of like Catalan is a language in itself, separate from Spanish. That's how they see it as well. It's one of the.
So does the language predate Italian? Is it more of an ancient language?
It is. It predates Italian. It doesn't predate spoken Italian.
Or
whatever spoken Italian is.
What's the side by side?
Yeah, it doesn't predate Tuscan, which is the official language, the Florentine language. The only reason that Tuscan or Florentine, for Florence is in Tuscany, it's a province of, it's a region of Italy. The only reason that became the official language of Italy is because of Dante. Dante writes in Florentine, in Tuscan. And the Italians just adopted that. Boccaccio also. writes in Florentine. There, in the Renaissance especially, too, there's a great deal of literature that comes out of that section of Italy. While Sicily, at that particular point, in the Renaissance, is dormant in terms of its, I shouldn't say dormant, but doesn't produce what it had produced. The great flowering of Sicilian literature is in the 12th century, with the great poets, and then in the 19th century with my guys, the Iberisti. Well, thank you all for coming. I'd love to talk about